Hi all, welcome to the video lecture series of object-oriented programming. In this video lecture, we'll be discussing about creating threads. In Java, there are two ways to create threads. One, by extending the thread class. In Java, there exists a class named thread, and if you want to create a thread, we can extend that class and then create a thread. Second way of creating a thread is by implementing Runnable Interface. We will see each one of these two one by one. So first of all, we will see how to create threads by extending thread class. The keyword extends is used in the case of inheritance that we all know. So extending thread class means we are actually creating an inheritance relationship between the existing class thread and the class that we create. So thread class is a class that already exists in Java, and if we create a class that extends that thread class, we are actually creating a thread. Thread class provides several constructors as well as several methods that can be used for creating and performing several operations on a thread. This thread class extends the object class. That we know that object class is the parent class of all classes in Java. So whatever may be the class that we create or already existing class, all those classes will be the child classes of object class. And thread class also implements an interface named Runnable. And the constructors that are commonly used in the thread class are as follows. First constructor without any parameter. In this case, we'll be creating a thread without any specific properties or specific feature. Second thread constructor is accepting a parameter which is of type string. So if you want to create a thread to which we have to assign a name, if you want to call the thread by a name, then we can use the second constructor in which we can pass the name of the thread as a parameter to the constructor. Third constructor of thread class is accepting an object of the class that implements Runnable Interface. We know that threads can be created by implementing Runnable Interface also. That is the second way of creating thread. So if you are creating a thread by implementing Runnable Interface, in that case we can create the thread. We have to create a thread by calling the third constructor, and we have to pass the object of the class that implements Runnable Interface as the parameter that we will see in the upcoming slides. And finally, a thread constructor with two parameters. One is the object of the class that implements Runnable Interface and the name of the thread that we have to give. These are the four commonly used constructors inside thread class for creating threads. We have seen these methods when we described the life cycle of thread. All these methods are coming inside the thread class. Start method is used to start the execution of the thread. Run method, it is a method inside which you have to write all the lines of code that the thread needs to be executed when it's running. And sleep method, if you want to suspend the thread for certain amount of certain time, then we have to use the sleep method. Then if you want to set the priority of a thread, we have to use the set priority. If you want to get the priority of a thread, we have to use get priority. And if you want to terminate the thread, we have to use the stop method. If you are creating thread by extending thread class, this approach provides us with more flexibility in both handling multiple threads when we create the threads by using extending the thread class. The steps that we have to follow to create threads by extending the thread class are as follows. The first step is we have to override the run method that is available inside the thread class. We saw some of the methods available inside the thread class. One among those methods is the run method. So when we create a class that extends the thread class, so it is inheritance relationship, right? Suppose I have a class A that extends thread. So A is the child class and thread is the parent class. And what is method overriding? When both parent class and child class are having the same method, the method with same method signature. So that is what we mean here. We have to override the run method. The run method is already available inside the thread class. We have to write the run method inside the class that we create, which extends the thread class, because it is this method inside which we'll be writing the business logic. That means it is this method that will be executed when the thread is running. So all the actions that the thread have to perform will be inside this method. This method acts as the entry point for the thread. So inside this method, so first of all we have to write a class that extends the thread class. Then inside that class we have to override the run method. Overriding means we have to write once again the run method inside our class and write all the lines of code that we want to. That is, we want to perform when the thread is running. We have to write all those lines of code inside this run method, because it is this method that acts as the running entry point of a thread. And syntax of run method is public void run. There is no return type and nothing. So we can write public void run, empty pair of parentheses, open the pair of curly brackets, write the lines of code that we need to execute when the thread is running. So that is the first thing that we have to do. And then second step is, once a thread object is created, now we have created a class that extends thread, we override the run method. The second step is we have to create the thread object. For creating the object, what we have to do, we have to create the object of the class that we created just now. Create the object of the class that we have created just now. Then we have to call the start method. Start method is also a method that comes inside the thread class. So by calling the start method, what happens is we are actually calling the run method. So when we call the start method, it is actually the run method that starts executing. I hope you understood. First of all, write the class that extends the thread class. Then override the run method inside the class. That's the first step. Second step is create the object of the class. In our example, class A extends thread. So A is the class that we wrote. It is extending the thread class. Inside class A, we'll be writing the run method. That becomes a method overriding, because the parent class of A is thread. Thread also contains the run method. We are again writing the run method inside the class A, so it becomes method overriding. Next is we have to create the object of class A. So A object 1 equal to new A. So that creates the object of class A. So now we have the thread object. Why we are saying it is a thread object? Because class A is extending a thread. Class A is child of class thread. So child of a thread is thread itself. So since A is the child of class thread, A is also a thread. So we created the object of a thread. Now we want to start the thread. If we want to start the thread, we have to call the method start that comes inside the thread class. So here object 1 is the name of the object. So object 1.start starts our thread. And when this start method is invoked, the run method inside the class A that we wrote will be executed. This is how we have to implement, or this is how we have to do, these are the steps that you have to follow if you want to implement or if you want to create a thread by extending the thread class. This is the example that shows how to create threads by extending the thread class. First of all, we are creating a class that extends thread. So here the relationship is inheritance. So thread demo is the child class of thread. So child of a thread is a thread. So thread demo is also a thread right now. So whenever we create an object of class thread demo, we are actually creating threads. Now as mentioned earlier, we have to override the run method, because inside the parent class thread there is one method named run. We are again writing that method inside the class thread demo. So this becomes method overriding. And in this example we have written a constructor also that is not compulsory. And see how we are creating the thread. Thread demo t1 equal to new thread demo. We are creating the object of class thread demo. Since thread demo is extending a thread, child of a thread is a thread. So thread demo is also thread. We are actually creating the objects of class thread demo. That means we are creating threads. So we are creating threads, and we have used the second constructor of class thread for creating we have used the constructor of class thread demo, and we are giving the name of the thread here, thread 1. See, here we have written the constructor already. So we are forced to use this constructor when we create the objects. If this constructor was not there, then we could have used the default constructor of class thread_demo. But since we have written the constructor here, whenever we create object of class thread_demo, we have to use this constructor compulsorily. This constructor means the constructor that accepts one string variable or string value as the parameter. So whenever we create the object of class thread_demo, we have to compulsorily use the constructor that to which we have to pass one string value as the input. Otherwise it will show an error. This is because we have written the constructor here. So T1 is one thread and T2 is another thread. So when we call T1.start, as you can see, there is no method named start inside this class. So T1.start is actually the entry point, also this method actually calls the method run. Similarly, T2.start, the start method is actually calling the run method itself. So when we ask T1.start, it will be executing the run method of object T1. Similarly, T2.start will be executing the run method of T2. Why we are saying the run method of T2 and run method of T1? Because we know that whenever we create an object of a class, the object will be getting a copy of the variables and methods of that class. So here T1 is the object of class thread_demo. T1 will get a copy of the string variable as well as the run method, its own copy, and T2 also will get its own copy of the string variable thread name and run method. So T1.start will call the run method of T1, T2.start will call the run method of T2, and inside run method we have written certain lines of code based on which we'll be getting the output. Here we have used thread.sleep, which sleeps the thread for 50 milliseconds. Sleep method is actually a method inside the class thread, and that method accepts one integer parameter and it considers that parameter as milliseconds. So 50, if you have given 50, means it is considering this value as 50 milliseconds. So everything that is given as parameter to a sleep method is measured as in milliseconds by the sleep method, and sleep method is used to suspend the thread for a definite amount of time. So here 50 means we are sleeping the thread for 50 milliseconds. So based on this, we'll be getting the output like this. You can try to execute this program in your system and you'll be getting the output like this. And in each system, the exact output may be different because it is thread. Both of them are running parallelly. So in one system you may be getting one output, in the other system you may be getting another output. Another output in the sense, it may not be in the same exact order like this. The order of these lines will be different depending upon which thread is working first, because threads are parallelly working at the same time. I hope you understood. Try to execute this program and then you will be getting the output. Second way of creating thread in Java is by using Runnable Interface. If you want to create a thread by using Runnable Interface, create a class that implements Runnable Interface. This interface has got only one method, and that method is a run method. So inside the class that implements Runnable Interface, give the implementation of the run method. That is the basic thing that we have to do when we have to create a thread by using Runnable Interface. Now we will see what are the different steps that we have to follow when we use or when we implement Runnable Interface to create a thread. Now we will see the different steps that we have to follow to create a thread by implementing Runnable Interface. Step number 1. First of all, we have to write a class that implements Runnable Interface. Inside that interface we have only one method, that is the run method. So inside the class that implements Runnable Interface, we have to provide the implementation of the run method. As mentioned earlier, run method is the entry point for the thread. It is the method inside which we have to write all our logic, that is the lines of code that we need to execute when the thread starts working. And syntax of the run method is public void run. This is same as that we have seen in the previous slides when we use the extending thread class method for creating thread. The second step is to create a thread object. Now we have a class that implements Runnable Interface. So it's an interface, it's not a thread class, right? So a child of a thread class is a thread, but in this method we are not extending the thread class. We are actually implementing an interface named Runnable. So then how can we create a thread object? For that we have to use the third or fourth constructor of the thread class that is mentioned here, thread that accepts two parameters. First parameter is the object of the class that implements runnable interface. That is the object of the class that we created in the step number 1. In step number 1, we created a class that implemented runnable interface. We have to create an object of that class, and that object has to be passed as the first parameter to this thread constructor. And second constructor is the name of the thread that we have to give. So when we call the thread constructor, this thread constructor, we are actually creating a thread object. In this, when we call this constructor, the first parameter must be the object of the class that implements runnable interface. That is the class that created in the first step. The last step is, now we have the thread object. Now we want to start working. That we want to call the thread, or we want the start to start work. We want our thread to start working. For that we have to call the start method. So the object that we created in the second step, dot start, that will start the thread. As mentioned earlier, when we call the start method, it is actually calling the run method, and all the lines of code inside the run method will start working. So these are the 3 steps that we have to follow if you want to create a thread by implementing runnable interface. Now we will see an example of creating thread by implementing runnable interface. As you can see, we have a class runnable demo that implements runnable, and constructor is optional, it's not compulsory. Then we are writing the run method. That means this interface runnable has got a run method. Inside that we are writing this the logic that we need our thread to execute. So all the lines of code that our thread need to be executed will be written here. Okay, here in this example we have written the thread object, thread reference variable, and we are assigning the thread as the current thread inside the constructor, and we are printing creating t.getName. That is, this getName is a method inside the class thread which returns the name of the current thread. Okay, so here the basic step we have to understand is implements runnable interface and give the implementation of the run method. And then inside other class we are writing the main method, and see, we are first of all creating the object of the class that implemented runnable interface. So runnable demo is the class that implemented runnable interface. We are creating the object of that class. So R1 is the object of the class that implemented runnable interface, and then we are creating the thread by using the second or third constructor of the thread class. Here the first parameter is R1. What is R1? R1 is the object of runnable demo. Runnable demo is the class that implemented the runnable interface. And second parameter is the thread name. And then we are calling the start method of that thread. So here the thread T1 started. Again we are creating another object R2 of class runnable demo. Then we are creating the second thread by calling the constructor again. We are passing the object of the class that implemented runnable interface as the parameter, and thread name as the second parameter. So this creates a second thread, and we are starting that thread. So when this runnable demo R1 object is created, R1 equal to new runnable demo, actually the constructor written here is getting executed. So here we have written t is equal to thread.current thread. So we are assigning this t as the current thread here. Okay, because we have to get the name of the thread, etc. So we are assigning the thread reference variable as the current thread. So when we created the object R1, that will be one thread. When we created R2, that will be another thread. So here when we created the object R1, t refers to R1. When we created R2, t refers to R2. So when we create the object R1, when we use t.getName, the name will be thread1. Similarly, when we created object R2 and when we call the constructor runnable demo, in that line, in that constructor, if we call t.getName, the output will be thread2, because that is the name that we are passing. I hope you understood. Then the output remains the same. As you can see here, the output of the the previous program that we saw by using extending thread class, and output of this program remains the same. So the output remains the same, only the working and the implementation part there will be a small. We shall conclude now. In this video lecture we discussed about how to create threads in Java, two different ways to create threads and examples of each of those methods. That is all in this video lecture. Thank you so much.